So, as you've probably already noticed if you're watching this on YouTube, the current state of what I'm going to call the self-improvement industry has honestly become a mess. And not only on YouTube, but on a lot of other social media platforms and even in-person interaction with any of the younger generations. So you hear and you see a lot of this content. And I say this rather ironically, as someone who's seemingly also making self-improvement style content myself, that I actually don't have a positive view of that industry as a whole. And I think that there's a lot of cult-like followings and a lot of misconceptions about what self-improvement and what, well, I don't actually like the term self-improvement. I think the better word is actually wellness, at least for what I'm trying to achieve with this channel and trying to teach other people to do the same. But I think that the self-improvement industry as a whole has done good, and I think especially for men, where in a lot of cases men have been historically afraid to pursue their mental health, and it wasn't necessarily something that was a part of our culture for men to specifically take care of their minds and to do things like meditation, journaling, whatever things you hear of as part of self-improvement. And I think in that sense, it's a really good thing that self-improvement has become so popular. And honestly, that type of content has been very helpful for myself, and that's what I would say it's one of the things that sparked me to try and pursue this type of thing for myself, and what has eventually led me to now try and make content to help other people with these same type of issues. But I think that there's a dark side that other people need to be very much aware of if they're going to be treading through this self-improvement territory. And I think that a lot of content has actually done, I wouldn't say more harm than good. Well, some content does do more harm than good, but I would say the industry as a whole maybe necessarily hasn't done more harm than good, but there's most certainly been harm caused. And I think that being careful and keeping a very cautious mind when looking at this content is extremely important. So, first of all, I think that the term self-improvement isn't necessarily the best way of laying out what we're actually trying to do here, and what a lot of people I think are inherently really trying to do when they get into self-improvement content and this type of lifestyle, quote unquote lifestyle as a whole. So, um, I think a lot of it has just become a badge where people kind of just want to feel superior to others because they're part of this self-improvement cult. And I will say cult because in a lot of cases it honestly is a cult. You see a lot of these influencers and a lot of people who at the worst cases are just trying to make a quick buck off of people who are less suspecting, and in the best cases just have honest intentions and don't really want to mislead people, but in the end they often still do. So self-improvement implies that what you're trying to do is just be better at something just for the sake of doing it, so to speak. But I think that the goal when we're talking about this isn't necessarily the self-improvement itself, but it would actually be the holistic wellness and the health of the individual as a whole. That's what I pursue, and that's what I think of when I think of my daily life and what I want others and all people on this planet to do for themselves. And I think of it as wellness. And I think the word that I would like to use, if there's one thing that I would want people to associate with this channel, with my content, it would be wellness, because wellness implies a level of health and a level of a self and spirituality and all that you do. Where self-improvement, I think, especially now with all the content that we see, towards discipline and hard work and achieve your goals, is kind of become very toxic in a sense. And I think that thinking of it as self-improvement and putting these tags on it isn't necessarily a good thing at a certain point. And it's not, and I think a lot of people get misled because they think that it is a specific club, where they see these influencers who kind of create these cult-like followings, and they very much push very specific beliefs on their audience. And it's like, no, go to the gym. No, no. Like, I mean, and you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say these things, but it's like, no, get in the gym. Like, especially for young men, it's always get in the gym. It's always work out. You're not even in the gym. You got to meditate every morning. You got to journal. You got to do all this stuff. But I think that these very specific things just lead people to kind of see those things and think, well, I don't really want to do that. That's not necessarily what I'm actually thinking of. Like, that's not something that I necessarily want for myself, and for good reason, because what type of philosophy is it to push onto your subscribers to say that you have to go to the gym or you're not living your life properly? Like, I'm talking about these very specific things that you hear as part of self-improvement, which are very much lead to this type of cult-like energy and this very alienating and isolating energy to people who aren't part of these clubs, just to feel superior, but don't necessarily actually hold that much salt when you break them down in real life. Now, this click mentality, I think, is probably the most dangerous thing in all the self-improvement industry, again, as I'm going to call it. But it's possible that even you have probably been affected by this as well, and you kind of see this, and you actually think, and a lot of people have been driven away from the path of what I'm trying to put out, which is, or at least, you know, as I'm gonna suggest as a rivaling philosophy to the traditional self-improvement that we see in a lot of social media, which would be a more personal and individualized sense of holistic wellness, which doesn't necessarily mean doing certain things like going to the gym, like meditation and journaling. Now, these may be part of the solution for you and for any other person who wants to seek wellness for themselves, but they really aren't the goal. What is actually the goal is the personal wellness of the individual. The thing is, it's going to be very different for each person, and I think that this type of thing can just be very harmful. So whether we do it consciously or not, I think that all humans are naturally trying to achieve wellness in their life. And wellness and health is just essentially a word for whatever it is that is good to you and whatever it is that drives your actions. That's not necessarily a clique that it's a part of or a club that you can really choose to be a part of or not. The fact is, we're on this world and you can't necessarily choose whether to be part of wellness, part of self-improvement. Not self-improvement, again, it's a toxic word for it, but I think you can see it that way as well. Because self-improvement and the act of constantly growing and improving, I think, is a necessary and non-negotiable part of wellness for almost every person. Humans naturally adapt to their situation, and that's a principle that pretty much always holds true in any area of life, is that humans just naturally adapt to what they're doing in life. And at a certain point, if you're only doing the exact same thing and you never push or do different things, and I'm not necessarily talking about forcing yourself to do things that you're uncomfortable with, though that can very much be helpful for a lot of people. I'm just talking about generally growing and developing in some way in your life is going to be pretty much entirely necessary if you want to achieve continued happiness, because humans adapt to what they're doing, and at a certain point, whatever it is that inspires you to push forward is essentially what you can consider hope. And at a certain point, that hope can go away once you've actually achieved it, and all you're doing is now looking at the next level, and what used to be your old goal that you've hopefully now achieved is pretty much just going to become your new baseline, and it's not actually going to feel like you're doing anything great anymore. And a lot of that happiness will be fleeting, and it'll actually go away rather quickly. So you need to constantly keep pushing and growing, and I think that's what a lot of people talk about and what a lot of people mean when they say self-improvement, and that can be good. But I think the tag now has pretty much become toxic, and I don't like for people to think about it in that way of self-improvement anymore. But when something goes wrong, and when people try and push these when people try and push these actions that they might have seen from social media or from some other influencer, and maybe that influencer meant well on them, but what they pretty much start pushing, and they might fail to achieve some form of a very specific goal or ideology. Again, that could be going to the gym, that could be meditation, journaling, some very specific and measurable failure, or failure as the person themselves defines it. And that leads them to think that self-improvement isn't for them, that wellness isn't for them. And that's what I mean by this kind of club mentality. And people kind of keep going on, and they think that because one specific thing didn't work out, that this thing as a whole isn't for them. But by definition, it is. And the reason that it's very important that everyone defines this thing for themselves is because the same things aren't going to work for everyone. And what can happen is that when people try and chase these hyper-specific goals that might have worked for someone else, and maybe this person, and maybe the people that suggested these things really are living great lives, and this has worked for them. But when people don't think individually about these things and very cautiously about what actually applies to them and what doesn't, what can end up happening, and what I've seen, is that people think that self-improvement and that trying to live better lives for themselves just isn't for them because these very specific versions of them didn't work for them. And then they essentially give up on their lives entirely as a whole. And I'm not saying this, in this very in the worst way possible that people give up, but people don't end up seeking as much goodness for their lives or as much improvement in their lives as they possibly could, because they think the self-improvement club or clique, again, which is not an accurate way of saying it, isn't for them, because they see that other people are doing it in this very specific way. And when they can't do it in that very specific way, they think there must be something wrong with them, and that they're not cut out for self-improvement, that they're not cut out for wellness, that they're not cut out to seek a better lifestyle for themselves, and that they just need to go back to whatever they were doing before, and that this isn't for them, which is absolutely not the case. I can guarantee you that. And if you've related to that thought before, or you think that that kind of sounds like something you've thought before, I can guarantee you that that is not the case. And it's just a matter of pursuing what might specifically work best for you, and not trying to listen less to other. And don't get me wrong, when I say I was going to say that you should try and listen less to other people, but it doesn't mean that you can't take in new perspectives, or that you can't take better perspectives from other people and try and really rationalize and always try and improve something, because your own knowledge and your own experimentation alone will never be enough. You really need the input of other people. You have to be very cautious about what you ingest and what you don't, because there's no real reason that you need to feel like you're held to some external standard, or that a certain imperfection is a reason to be ashamed, or that this isn't for you. Because the truth is, the only real reason that you ever really need to be ashamed or feel like this isn't for you is if you just straight up don't care. And if you just straight up don't care, first of all, you wouldn't even be watching this far if you straight up don't care. You must care at least some amount deep down, but you might have this twisted perception of what self-improvement actually is because of the self-improvement industry and the way that it's been kind of put into this paradigm over the past, well, maybe for longer, but especially for the past few years, as I've noticed anyways. But I'm also pretty young, so I don't know. So again, it looks different for everybody, and I'm not even talking about specific ideals for life and or something specific that you have to do that relates specifically to me. Now, you might be similar to me if if you relate to my content, or if you relate to the way that I pursue things, or the way that I word things, or the way that I think of things. But again, it's going to be very different for everybody, and it's not something that you have to feel like it's not something that you have to feel like you have to be very similar to everyone around you. Now, humans can think similarly, and often we should, because that's the only way a society really functions, is if humans cooperate and think similarly on very specific things. Obviously, if everyone was entirely individual and we really didn't think alike at all, which isn't the case, then society would be in chaos, and we would not have these structures and these systems that hold us together in our day-to-day lives. Now, again, these structures still aren't perfect, because there is a lot of individual variation in human beings, and honestly, a lot of government and a lot of society is our way of trying to cope and do, honestly, just our best. But the truth is, everyone still has to find it for themselves, and government will very rarely do all of the job for a person's wellness, even the ones that very much try, not to mention the ones that are corrupt and that don't care in the first place, which is unfortunately a decent chunk of them. So what I'm really suggesting is just that everyone thinks a lot more independently about their wellness, and that they think of it in the sense of wellness and what it is that gives them health and happiness. And again, this is whatever it is that you find to be important in life. This is not something that necessarily needs to be the same for everybody, but it's very independent. And I think it's very important for everybody, and including you, to actually think about this in this way, and to really think independently, and stop trying to please everyone around you, and really just think about what it is that drives your wellness as a whole. Now, a lot of it is going to depend on other people. Like, humans are social creatures to begin with. It's not like you can actually push everybody away and only think about yourself, because that's not a good thing either. All humans are equally valuable, and we need to make sure that we help each other out when we can. But you also can't neglect yourself, and you have to make sure that you're doing whatever it is that is best for your wellness, which in a lot of cases will be taking care of your relationships, being nice to the people around you. It will make you feel better in your daily life, and it's going to be something that will not fit into anyone else's paradigm of what they try and give you, of what wellness, what happiness, what self-improvement, what a better life actually is. It really is something that every individual person has to find for themselves. And though that is kind of scary, because that means no one can really tell you what it is that you need to do to make your life better. Now, that doesn't mean people can't help you, because again, humans do think similarly, and we can actually help each other out and think about a lot of the things that tend to make a better life for almost every human on this earth. But it's not going to be the exact same thing for everybody, and there are going to be individual variations in almost every situation, even within people, that you would consider to be very similar. So, like I've just said, wellness is actually automatic it's something that we humans automatically pursue. So we think about a lot of these things, and if you try and just think about any of the actions that you've taken, or whatever it is that you've pursued in the past, if you don't believe me when I say that humans naturally pursue what they think is good for them, then just try and assess your motivations for whatever it is that you've worked on, or something that, or whatever, it might even be what you're doing right now, whatever it is that you're pursuing and working on. It could be a hobby, it could actually be your career or something like that. But, if you actually sit down and think, and you could actually try doing this right now. I like to put a lot of thought exercises and stuff in my videos. You can do this right now if you want to. But if you actually sit down and think very deeply, and you can close your eyes if you want. I'm going to be closing my eyes because for me that helps me think. But if you actually sit down and think deeply about whatever it is that you work on, or whatever it is where you feel motivated, or you have some goal that you're working towards, and you put aside the actual physical end result of whatever it is, and you try and think deeper about what it is you actually want from it, and keep thinking, a lot of the time you'll find that when you keep thinking further, what it actually boils down to is something that is more in relation to a very raw and very primordial human desire, or a very real human need that is evolutionary and that is largely biological, though of course not all human thoughts and all human actions are driven biologically. Just a lot of them are. So, for example, if you really think it is that you what, or sorry, if you really think what you want is success or some sort of material gratification, whatever it is, from a career or something, I think a lot of times you look deeper, and what it actually is a desire for respect or a desire for admiration or love from the people around you. And the reason that it's important to make that distinction, and the reason that it actually does matter why you're doing things, and don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean it's bad to seek material success necessarily in every case, or that you can't want to achieve hard work, or sorry, that you can't want to achieve uh, success in a career or to work hard towards your goals to achieve them. And even if it is for success or admiration or respect from others, because that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. That's exactly what it is, and maybe it'll actually help you in some way to pursue those goals for those reasons. When we narrow down these thoughts and we think deeper, it's not necessarily because there's anything bad about pursuing these things. It's just that it's very important to think about why exactly it is that you're doing something. Because a lot of the times, what will end up happening is that you will look into these goals and you'll think further and further, but when you actually get down to it, you'll realize that whatever it is that you're thinking of as the base primordial thing, that you're, the primordial emotion, admiration, love, respect from others, that you actually want to achieve, and then you look at the actual thing you're working on, you might find that it's actually not doing it in the way you think it is, and that your time would actually be better spent doing somewhere else. And in that case, it can actually be very useful to think deeply about these things in this way. So, and another thing to think about is, like I've said, we automatically pursue wellness, but then you might be thinking, why should I even go out of my way to try and make wellness a part of my life, or to be in the non-toxic side of self-improvement if, like you just said, it's automatic? So why would I specifically need to seek it out? Now, like I just said, when you do specifically seek it out, you can be much more accurate and much more diligent about your actions. And that doesn't mean that they're robotic or that they're non-emotional, because they can very much still be emotional yet logical. So when you actually start to approach things from a sense of wellness, you'll have a much realer and much more stable sense of clarity about what it is that you're doing in your daily life and why you're doing it. And that'll lead you to make better decisions. It'll lead you to make better decisions. It'll lead you to find a much more real and much more conscious and truthful effort of what it is that you're doing in your daily life, whatever it is you're working on, your career. And again, we're talking about a very fortunate situation here. Not everybody has the choice of doing a career that suits them emotionally, but everyone should aim to do something like that if they want to live the most happiness. Of course, that's not going to be, sometimes there's going to be temporary cases. And of course, I say this as a privileged person myself. Not everybody can actually sit down and have the option of making money in some way with something that also fulfills them the most emotionally. In a lot of cases, people have to work jobs. People have to support for their children. People are in poor economic situations. There really is just no way to just go off and say, I'm going to seek my emotional, spiritual fulfillment. It's a good thing in principle, but it doesn't always end up being the case. But that doesn't mean that you still can't seek it out if you are in a more fortunate situation, which you might be if you're here watching YouTube. Watch this far into the video. You might actually have more capability and more potential in this realm than you think you do. So going forward with all these things, again, what I'm trying to just suggest, and I don't want to draw out this video much longer than it has to, because I think I've said generally what I think on this topic, but I think it's just really important that we don't think of self-improvement and wellness in this very click type of way. And if you have kind of felt that self-improvement and wellness might not be for you, I'm just truly sorry that the self-improvement industry and a lot of this more toxic side of it has made it feel this way. But believe me, it's not the case. And it's actually a much more individual and a spiritual thing that's going to be very different for everybody. And something that you need to find for yourself, not something that you can pretty much just say, look at from a distance and say, nah, I don't think I'm a part of that crowd, because there really isn't that crowd. There is no club. There is no clique. This is something that's very individual and spiritual for each person. And though humans can come together socially, as I hope, as I gather more subscribers, can happen on this channel, it's still not something that's going to be this kind of cult-like following. And I don't want it to end up that way, because what's actually going to be most helpful for people is not going to be that cult-like and artificial following. Though maybe that might be what will get me the most controversy on this channel, or will potentially get me the most subscribers or popularity. but I think there's very serious ethical implications to that, and that what's actually going to be helpful for most people, and what you should aim to be very cautious of, is that you're very individual and very picky, and you take everything that you see with a grain of salt, and make sure and be aware that everything you apply is going to be very different for you. So just find yourself and be very conscious and very critical of your thinking, and don't feel like you have to apply it to any other person's conception of what self-improvement, what wellness, what health, what happiness, what joy, what fulfillment, what spirituality is for you, because the truth is it's very different for everybody, and it's not something that you actually want to be the same as another person. Now, it's different for everybody. It's pretty much sealed for life. Again, we don't actually get to choose when we're here on this earth. We are just put here against our own volition. Again, that's for everybody. So it's going to be up to you to find what it is that works for you. So take care of your mind, especially when you don't feel like it.